This all sounds great, but nobody has time for that. I hear the same objection constantly from senior leaders, from supervisors, from operations teams who've heard everything we've been teaching on this show. And it's not a lazy objection. It's an honest one. It reflects their daily experience. But my follow-on question is always the same. So how do you make the time? Well, welcome back to the Frontline Leadership Podcast, where we help organizations strengthen and empower the leaders their operations depend on. I'm your host, Craig Coyle, former Apache helicopter pilot, aerospace leader, and founder of Operation Lead. Look, over the last 4 episodes, we've spent time on some of the most foundational concepts in the Lead Like a Pilot framework, specifically the Aviate concept. We talked about what it actually means for a frontline leader, or any leader for that matter, to fly the plane, to identify and protect the work that only their position can do. We introduced the Eisenhower matrix as the tool that makes that concrete. And we named 3 practical starting points: prioritize, time block, and delegate. If you haven't heard episode 22, I encourage you to start there. It's the foundation for everything we're going to talk about today. And my goal for today is to build on episode 22 and help you bring the theory to life. Because there's a meaningful difference between understanding a concept and knowing how to execute it inside a real operation with real staffing pressures in the middle of a real shift when the floor is moving and 3 people need an answer right now. I fundamentally believe the gap between understanding and execution is where that time objection lives. In reality, we all have time. We're either choosing how we spend it and what we spend it on, or we aren't. The first step was to understand how to view your time. Today's step is to take control of it. I want you to take a moment, maybe even pause the episode, and think about what a typical supervisor's day looks like before they've ever even had a chance to be intentional about anything. They walk in the door and the floor already has needs. Their inbox already has questions. Somebody above them already needs a status update. And somebody on their team already has a problem that needs an answer right now. Before they've made a single intentional decision, the day has already started making decisions for them. And the implicit message baked into that environment, and look, nobody says this out loud, nobody writes it into a policy, but it's this: it's be available, be responsive, keep things moving. And so they are, all day, every day. Nobody told them not to prepare for their crew brief or how important it is to have one. Nobody said that the one-on-one doesn't matter. Nobody said skip the difficult conversation that you've been thinking about since last week. But the environment says this louder than any directive could by never protecting the time, by never modeling the behavior, never treating proactive leadership as something worth defending from the urgency around it. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Even when the urgency lets up, even when there's a brief window where nothing is actively on fire, most supervisors still won't default to the important non-urgent leadership work. They default to something else entirely. They jump on the line. They grab that high priority part. They fill the gap the way they've always filled gaps, with the craft that got them promoted in the first place. The craft they probably still have a responsibility to execute on. And honestly, it makes complete sense. It's the work they know how to do well. It's familiar, it's tangible. You can see the result of it at the end of the shift, and it's still part of their job duties. The high level behind the scenes leader work doesn't give you that kind of immediate feedback. And it certainly won't take priority when nobody has ever given you enough clarity on what that work actually looks like and why it's important. So the day gets filled. It just doesn't get filled with the right things. And from a distance, it can look like productivity. It might even feel like productivity. But guess what? The real leadership work still didn't happen. And that matters, because the work that matters most in frontline leadership, it's cognitively demanding. It's developing people, preparing for conversations, thinking through mission clarity, planning for the week ahead. That requires real focus, real mental energy, real intentionality. The unfortunate truth is most supervisors doing that work, if they're doing it at all, are doing it with whatever is left over after the floor has taken everything else. The hardest thinking happens at the end of the longest days. The most important conversations get the least preparation. The proactive work that could prevent a problem 6 weeks from now gets whatever scraps of attention remain after the reactive work is done. I'm here to tell you that this is not a personal leadership failure. It's an organizational design failure. And until we name it as one, until we as organizations stop looking at individual supervisors and start looking at the conditions they're operating inside, the fix will keep missing the real problem. So what does it actually look like to build something different? Well, that's where we're going today. See, in episode 22, I named 3 tools: prioritize, time block, and delegate. Today, we're going to go deeper on the first 2 because I think this is where most supervisors stall and where most organizations leave them without enough to actually execute on. So first, let's dive a little bit deeper on prioritization. Episode 22 gave the concept. Before the shift starts, identify 1 to 3 things that only you can do today. Write them down. That list is the job. Simple and true, but it's almost impossible to build consistently without one thing the organization has to provide first, and that's clarity. Most supervisors don't default to the important, non-urgent work we've highlighted in this podcast during the gaps in their day, not because they lack discipline, but because nobody ever sat down with them and clearly defined what their highest value leadership inputs actually are. The quadrant exists, the concept makes sense, but without specific role-level clarity on what belongs in it, the list stays abstract, and abstract lists don't get protected. That clarity will not magically appear across a cohort of frontline leaders. It needs to be deliberately and clearly provided. So what does that look like in practice? It means having a direct conversation with your supervisors about what their most important leadership inputs actually are. Not the task list, not the responsibilities on the job description, the specific high-value work that only their position can do that directly shapes the performance, development, and culture of the team beneath them. In our context, everything we've been building across this show, those inputs are identifiable. Crew briefs and intentional preparation for them, weekly one-on-ones in their prep, daily proactive communication, mission clarity for the week ahead, the difficult conversation that needs to happen before it becomes a crisis, decision-making. The list goes on. When a supervisor has that level of clarity, when they know specifically what belongs on their priority list and why it matters, the list stops being abstract. It becomes their leadership operating system, and it becomes something worth protecting. And that's where time blocking enters. And that's where the organizational commitment has to show up. So let's go deeper on time blocking now. Episode 22 said, what gets scheduled gets done. What doesn't gets consumed by whatever shows up first. Again, true, but incomplete, because time blocking fails in most operations, not because supervisors don't understand the concept, but because the organization never created the structural conditions for it to survive contact with the floor. Here's what I mean. Let's say a supervisor blocks 30 minutes on a Wednesday morning for one-on-one preparation. Then a production issue surfaces. Then their manager needs a report. Then the team member has a question that apparently only they can answer. By the time those things resolve, the block's gone. The preparation didn't happen. And we've all been there. See, that pattern repeated enough times teaches the supervisor something powerful. The block isn't real. It's aspirational. It's what they'd do if their leadership and the floor both cooperated. So guess what? They stop blocking. They go back to reacting, and the objection wins again. So here's my point. Time blocking is not just an individual discipline. It's a cultural and a structural commitment that has to be modeled and protected from above. So again, what does that look like in practice? It means senior leaders treat supervisor planning time the same way they treat a safety meeting, as non-negotiable, visible, and worth protecting. It means asking about it in the one-on-one conversations with supervisors, noticing when it's getting consumed and naming it, modeling the behavior at your own level so it doesn't feel like something you're asking them to do in a vacuum. It means the schedule is designed with protected windows built in, not carved out heroically by each supervisor against the grain of everything around them, but deliberately structured into how the operation runs. And it means that when a supervisor does protect a block and uses it with intention, that gets recognized, not as an exception, but as the standard you're building towards. Because here's what most supervisors never get to experience. When the block is real, when it's protected and used with genuine intention, the quality of everything else changes. The crew brief is better because it was prepared and the team becomes more engaged. The one-on-one builds trust because they're thoughtful going in. The difficult conversation goes well because the internal pre-flight actually happened. The mission is clear because someone took 15 minutes to think about it and create a legitimate action plan before the week began. The time invested in the block pays back in every interaction that follows it. See, when these two disciplines are operating together, consistent prioritization and protected time, everything else we've been building comes to life because leaders are taking the time to bring legitimate value to their teams. Consistency compounds, engagement improves, turnover declines. People actually enjoy and are committed to the work. A leadership operating system doesn't magically bring an organization to life. Leaders who prepare for every element within said system do. It stops being nobody has time for that, and it becomes we built the time for that. It stops being, oh, those meetings and routines don't work. It becomes we put the effort in to make them work. The shift from reactive to intentional or from consumed to protected is the difference between a leadership culture that develops people when a crisis forces it and one that develops people because the system was built to do it every single week. And that's not a personal achievement. It's an organizational one. And it all starts with an organization that builds the conditions where proactive leadership can actually survive and a frontline leader who prioritizes and protects the high-value inputs they create and provide to their team. Look, if today's conversation resonated and you're looking for a practical starting point, something your supervisors can use to begin building this kind of daily structure and intentionality, I invite you to download the Leaders Pre-Flight Checklist at operationlead.com/checklist. It's free and it's built to give your supervisors a concrete daily framework to work from right away. And if you're a senior leader thinking about what it looks like to build this kind of operating system across your entire front line, not just one supervisor, but all of them, head to operationlead.com to learn about our system and process. Next week, we're shifting gears. I'll be joined by Jim Mayer, founder of the Manufacturing Connector and host of the Manufacturing Culture Podcast, for a conversation about what culture actually is, where it lives, and who really builds it. If you've ever put together an organizational values list or a mission statement and wondered why nothing actually changed, you're not going to want to miss this one. That's episode 27. And until then, I'm Craig Coyle, and this is the Frontline Leadership Podcast. Let's go.